All right, well, let's kick it off. Again, appreciate everybody attending the webinar today. I'm happy to kind of dive in and get started here. So today we're going to be talking about accountants or accounting and bookkeepers in e-commerce, with the goal of just contextualizing the, I guess, the profession of accounting and the profession of bookkeeping against your like real world experiences, either a business owner or somebody who works inside of a business, and kind of giving you the insight that you might need to understand where to go from your current situation, or if you maybe need to scale back, or if you can afford to kind of do things on your own. Um, Somebody asked in the chat if there will be a recording. There absolutely will. Generally, I get to editing and finishing up and sending out the recording the same day. So probably by the end of the day, you'll receive a link with the recorded webinar. All right, and just to introduce ourselves, if you've seen any of WebGility's content either on YouTube or you've been to a webinar of ours, you've definitely heard my voice or seen my face. I'm John May. I am the customer engagement manager, or face of WebGility, as you will. I've been with WebGility for just about 3 years now. I started in implementation and kind of made my way into marketing and customer engagement at this point. I'll let Seth introduce himself real quick as well.
Yeah, thank you, John. I am Seth David, the chief nerd of Nerd Enterprises. I see from the list of attendees a lot of names I recognize, so thank you all for showing up. For those of you who have no idea who I am, long story short, I started out as an accountant, built an accounting firm, recently sold that off because over the years I evolved into what I like to call an accounting education platform where we create educational resources, mostly for bookkeepers and accountants, but we have a sprinkling of business owners too who come in and take advantage of our courses and other trainings.
Awesome. So yeah, we are very equipped to kind of take you on this journey and help you out. So for the agenda, this is just going to cover what we talk about in the slides, and then as you see at the end, we'll have a Q&A. But first, we'll go through essentially the basics of accounting and bookkeeping. This might seem like a very entry level or surface level topic, but I think it's important to start with a baseline and understand the key differences between accounting and bookkeeping, just to, again, contextualize what that might mean for your business. And then moving forward, we'll go to kind of understanding how to know what like you need for your business, and if you again should scale up or if you can afford to kind of maintain things yourself. We'll kind of go over some cautionary tales, the risks of maybe not managing your accounting at all or managing it poorly, and then we'll jump into some general tips and advice for either again scaling or managing things yourself, or when you need to hire a bookkeeper or an accountant, what that looks like, and sort of what to look out for. And again, we'll end with that Q&A, so we'll get to any questions you guys have and give you some real world insight. So to start off with the basics, at a high level, we'll start with bookkeepers. This generally will involve recording transactions, reconciliation, payroll and expenses. So pulling the paper trail or the data from any of your sales channels or revenue sources and managing them all in one place. So recording your orders, your transactions, anything that's happening on your sales channels, and then reconciling that, and then managing your payroll and any other expenses that you might have in-house. This also includes like generating statements and reports, understanding where the finances are at in the business, understanding the profitability of the business, maybe not necessarily taking it so far as to guiding the business based off of that data, but at least preparing that data so that it can be analyzed. Invoicing customers, and then something I pulled from the U.S. Department of Revenue: the median salary in the U.S. for a bookkeeper is around $56,000 a year. It starts out in the like mid 40s and kind of tops out closer to the 60s. But the median is that 56 a year, just to give you a kind of a starting point in what a salaried bookkeeper might be. And as a final note, the bookkeeper role is great for handling that administrative workload that maybe the business owner might not have the time to spend on. So doing those administrative tasks like pulling in the data from your sales channels, very time consuming. Having a bookkeeper do that for you and understand how all of it works together is super important. And then in contrast, the accountant may take things a little bit further. So the accountant may sort of do those same responsibilities that a bookkeeper might, but they generally will take it a little bit further. So they'll manage the data that is being collected. So they'll take all of that transactional data or the expense data and look at it from a high level and understand again what the profitability of the business is like, and then use that to create a budget going forward or make larger business decisions to kind of propel the business forward. Uh, they generally also will take on the tax preparation and filing or maintaining compliance with regulatory bodies. So from sales tax all the way up to income tax, uh, that can be a large ask, and accounting or accountants will generally take that on. They'll generally also do cost analysis and uh, may dabble in some consulting. Seth, I know you kind of wanted to touch on uh, it's sort of a auxiliary point beyond accountants where they take a step into the CFO role as well. But just to end it here for the accountants, the median salary for an accountant is generally around 78,000 a year. So a little more expensive. This is generally because of the education that's required, the higher education that's required for an accountant to maintain compliance and get their certification. But Seth, yeah, I'll turn it over to you if you wanted to touch on that CFO point you talked about.
Yeah, sure. There's really the way I see it, you've identified two of the three major levels of, let's just generally call it accounting and bookkeeping roles. So we have, as you mentioned, the bookkeeper, and we have the accountant. And for purposes of this discussion, maybe we can kind of draw a line between that and the controller's role, right? So if you're looking at a larger company where they're going to hire somebody in-house full time to handle the accountant role, that would probably be the controller, where they're involved in everything you've got here in the slide, and then more generally the internal audit stuff, like making sure that they are in compliance in every way. And then the third one is something that I think a lot of accountants and bookkeepers who are providing consulting services to the business owners are interested in learning more about, which is that CFO role. Right now, the CFO role in a big company, when you have a company that's big enough that they hire all three, the CFO oversees the controller oversees all the accounting staff, who are essentially doing all the bookkeeping. So that's kind of the hierarchy. The CFO's, I would guess, median salary is going to be something more on the order of like 150,000 a year, because again, more responsibility, more more compliance required, more experience required, all of it. And really what they're going to do more so than anybody else is they're going to lay out the yardsticks for the company. They're going to be responsible for doing the forecasts and the budgets and doing all the things that where they take the work that's done by the accountant and the accounting staff or bookkeepers, and their work essentially gets rolled up so that the CFO can look at that compared to the benchmarks and the forecasts that they might have created, and do those kind of variance analysis, right? What did we say we're going to do? So you talk about like publicly traded companies, when their earnings come out, and everybody wants to know, how did their earnings do compared to what they said they were going to do? And that's really the CFO level role. They're going to also do all the major filings with governments, and certainly if the SEC is involved in any way. And if the time comes when a company wants to go public, that's definitely going to involve the CFO, because that's the first thing they're going to need to do is start doing those regulatory filings. So that's my sort of short version of what the CFO's role looks like.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. Yeah, every CFO that I've worked with or met personally, obviously has that CPA accreditation, and they are always, as an anecdotal kind of point here, they are always stone cold killers in my book. Very smart, very astute people that understand things at the highest level. So, definitely a good distinction to make between that just baseline bookkeeper, accountant, and then the next kind of final step up being that CFO role. And we'll go through some key differences as well. I know I kind of touched on a little bit of these before, but the biggest one or the biggest key difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant would be generally the education. Bookkeepers aren't necessarily required to have a higher education to be a bookkeeper. There are some certificates or certifications that bookkeepers can attain that allow them to kind of have that prestige and be considered maybe a little higher than others. But the CPA certification is one of the first things that sets accountants apart from bookkeepers, along with the fact that generally they'll need either a bachelor's or a master's degree. The next step up would be that strategic planning and responsibility. A lot of times, bookkeepers, again, do more of that administrative work, a lot of the kind of day-to-day work that is needed to keep the business running, but maybe not necessarily make those huge financial strategic decisions that kind of propel the business forward. And then sort of along the same lines of that CFO conversation we had, accountants can specialize in certain areas of accounting as well. So there's kind of that additional segmentation where they might specialize in forensic accounting or something like that, that kind of sets them apart. It's just another kind of level that accountants have that bookkeepers might not have a distinction of. And Sherry, I saw you asked, will we get a copy of the slides? Yes, we are recording the webinar. We will send a full recording of the webinar out at the end of the day, usually is when it's ready. If you want like just the slides themselves, I can email those to you as well, just directly. It's not generally something people ask for, but the video will automatically be sent out for you. All right, and so let's get into some more real world examples or like how this affects your business. So starting with the kind of the baseline here, which is if you're just starting out as a business owner, you might not actually need a bookkeeper to start out with. You might not need an accountant, especially if you don't need a bookkeeper. You can leverage technology. You can use all the free tools that are at your disposal to manage things yourself if you have the time and are willing to kind of spend a little bit more of that time managing the day-to-day administrative tasks. For those of you that are WebGility customers, you already know this, but WebGility does some of this for you. So utilizing a connector for your e-commerce stores to pull in your orders, to pull in your expenses, and spit them out into QuickBooks or whatever your system of record is. Even if it's not WebGility, something like that allows you to spend a lot less time pulling in that data and having to manage it yourself, and can save you having to kind of hire that bookkeeper if you can afford it yourself. But if you've grown enough that you need help managing those finances, kind of keeping everything in check, especially if you have multiple stores, multiple sources of that revenue outside of even e-commerce, maybe you run a brick and mortar, the first step is going to be looking at that bookkeeper to help lighten the load for you. And if you look at it from the lens of just allowing you to step back from the day-to-day of managing those transactional records or the expenses and focusing on the bigger picture of maybe getting more added to your catalog or focusing on your marketing or sales strategy, adding a bookkeeper makes a lot more sense. If you can afford it and you want to lighten the load on yourself to focus on other things, that's definitely the first step that you should take. And then again, finally, if you find yourself needing help making the bigger decisions, like if you need somebody to take a look at your revenue, take a look at your cash flow, and understand where to take the business from the point that you're at, the CPA accountant route is definitely going to be where you want to start moving towards. If you're having trouble figuring out what is right for the revenue of your business or what is right for the growth of your business, the accountant can definitely take you to the next level. And the risk of not managing your financial records, it should always be stated that there is a risk here if you choose to do things yourself, or if you choose not to use an accountant or a bookkeeper, or use someone that might not be reputable. You're going to run into a number of things. The first being just like a lack of understanding where your revenue is at and where your cash flow is at. And this snowballs into other areas as well. I think all of this is sort of kind of in the same ecosystem. So not understanding your revenue, not understanding your cash flow will mean that you don't know where you need to reinvest in your business. So you're not understanding where your products are performing well or what parts of your business are sort of hemorrhaging you money that you might need to cut off. And then not having that paper trail means that you have an audit risk. So it doesn't necessarily mean you are guaranteed to be audited, but there will always be the risk of audit if you don't manage your paper trail correctly. And having a bookkeeper or someone there to kind of take that load off of your shoulders is a super big win. And then sort of a last auxiliary point here would be that you might struggle to acquire more funding or investment uh, from venture capitalists or whoever you're trying to get the loan from, because you don't have those financial records to point to the profitability of your business or how well the business has been performing. And do you have anything to add, Seth, to any of these points specifically? I know I've kind of breezed through some of these.
Yeah, no worries. You're doing great. One thing I just wanted to mention in general, kind of going back to the previous slide, but really blending into the whole conversation is, I know that when I started my own company, accountants who work independently like I do are just small business owners, the special type of business that we, focus on. So the the fact is, I was like a lot of other small businesses. When I started out, I had to bootstrap everything. I had to do it all myself. Obviously, I could do my own accounting and bookkeeping. But when it came to things like marketing, I always make fun of accountants about this because I have lots of conversations with accountants who kind of make fun of small business owners who try to do it themselves. And we liken it to trying to fix your own car when you have no experience as a mechanic. But, we all do a version of that where most accountants try to do their own marketing and they're terrible at it, most of them, not all of them. And so it's like we should drink our own Kool-Aid here. But bottom line, and really the point I want to make with this is we all probably have to bootstrap at the beginning, unless you just have a lot of funding. And so, yeah, you're going to do it yourself for a while. You're going to do your own bookkeeping. You're going to figure it out. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to screw it up spectacularly, most likely. And that's usually when you'll start to realize, okay, maybe it's two reasons you're going to finally decide to hire a bookkeeper. Either it's because you're up to your eyeballs and your time is much better spent focusing on what your area of expertise is, which I assume is whatever you started a business to do, right? Talking about e-commerce, you're probably an expert at selling whatever it is that you sell in your sales channels. So you'll realize that's the reason, because it's taking you away from being, from spending time where you're going to be most effective. The other reason you're going to hire somebody is, quite frankly, you realize you're at a place now where you can't afford it. And based on that alone, you should pay somebody who's an expert at what they're doing. And there are no shortage of experts. Shouldn't really say that. There's a certain shortage of experts specifically with e-commerce accounting. That's one of the reasons I push accountants to go into this, because there is a lot of demand and very short supply. But my point being, if you're the business owner and you're realizing you're at this stage where A, you can afford it, and B, your time is just not best spent doing something you're not an expert at, like bookkeeping, then those are the reasons when you realize you're there that it's time to go looking for somebody. And while there may be a shortage technically, they're out there. There are people who can and will and would love to have the opportunity to help you and get you freed up from having to deal with that part of your business so that you can scale your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really good distinction to make, that um, when you are just starting out, or even if you've been doing it for a while, if you are dedicated to growing your own business, it's very easy to fall into the camp of trying to do all of the things at once. You're trying to manage the accounting, you're trying to manage the marketing and the sales and the people management of it all. And it you might be getting away with it, and that's totally fine. But there are always things that you could be doing to make it easier on yourself. Like I said, utilizing that technology, or just getting someone in that is an expert in the thing that is that you're trying to do in the business. So if that's accounting, then getting an accountant or a bookkeeper to kind of manage that for you, so you can, like you said, just focus on the things that you're good at, that you are passionate about, that you started the business for. Um, which is, yeah, that's what we like to see. I mean, that's why Webgility exists. We want to make the minutia of pulling in and posting your transactions and keeping a paper trail of all of your financial records. We want to make that as easy and seamless as possible, so you can focus on the more important things that you got into the business for. And if you're a business owner, or if you work inside of a business and you're asking yourself, like, should I hire an accountant or a bookkeeper? Should I scale up from here? These are some questions that we recommend you ask yourself. And if you answer yes to at least a couple of these, it might be time to start considering hiring a bookkeeper and accountant. Are you reconciling regularly? Are you closing your books on a regular basis? Do you feel like you want to spend time on other tasks or more important things that add more value to the business? Are you looking to change the strategy or change the structure of your business, um, do you want more headcount or do you want more funding? Like, do you want to hire more people in the business and grow your business in that way, or are you looking to get more funding to invest back into the business? Do you have a firm grasp on tax structure? And I would say most people don't. That's a question that usually isn't easy. No. Do you have a firm grasp on tax structure and filing taxes? That's a big one for most people. So I'd say if you're finding yourself asking these questions, or um, if you're answering yes, or in some cases no to some of these questions, it's a good time to maybe start considering uh, branching out or looking to kind of add somebody to the roster.
So
And
John, I don't know if you wanted to take a minute to answer. There's a couple of questions, one in the
yeah,
chat, one in the
yeah, I
Q&A.
saw we can take the first one that was in the chat that Debbie asked. What are the main
Okay.
differences in e-commerce accounting? I think this is a good segue from your last point.
Sure, sure. So the main differences in e-commerce accounting are so it gets infinitely more complex as soon as you're into e-commerce versus say a simple service-based business. And the reason why is, going back to what we said earlier about the different roles of accountants and how there's more compliance to deal with. With e-commerce, there's more compliance. We likely have sales taxes to collect, which means we have sales tax returns to file, and the rules about that from state to state, and whether you have what's called nexus in a state, meaning do you have to collect sales taxes in that particular state? There are certain limits state by state based on different criteria. So there's a lot to know about it. And then the fact that you have inventory that you have to track, that now also adds several layers of complexity. And then to take that one step further, if you have any kind of manufacturing, as in I'm buying the parts and then I'm putting together those parts to create a finished product, now you have manufacturing or assemblies. Again, another layer of complexity that it's not even just enough to know how to use a program like QuickBooks Online, let's say. You have to know whether or not QuickBooks Online can handle that. And for that matter, where its limitations are there. In other words, at what point do I then need to bring on a third party app to manage that inventory and to manage those assemblies for me? Because at the end of the day, most importantly, and I'll kind of zoom out, to a sort of simpler bird's eye view of all of this and why it's important, is at the end of the day, if I'm your accountant, and you say to me, Seth, how's my company doing? One of the first things I'm going to need to show you, the first thing you're going to wonder is, what's my profit, right? But then the next question immediately is that profit even accurate? How do I know it's accurate? And one of the key ways to start looking into answering that is, well, let's take a look at your inventory, which is not on your profit and loss. That's on your balance sheet, right? And basically inventory transfers as it's sold off the balance sheet and onto the profit and loss. And this area in particular has to be managed so carefully, and it has to be accurate. And it goes into an infinite level of more questions in terms of, what do I include in that inventory? What do I include in the inventory cost? Is it just what I actually pay for the product? But what about shipping? I had to pay somebody to ship that product to me. I have to pay for warehousing. There's a lot of stuff to consider here, which if you're a business owner who's really good at selling widgets, then you get to this level of complexity with the accounting. That's when I certainly feel it's best to hire an accountant and focus on selling widgets that you do really well. Obviously, you want to know enough to know that the accountant you hire knows what they're doing. That's important, right? But you shouldn't have to get an accounting degree yourself to run your e-commerce company. And somewhere in there is the balance you have to find. And really, the answer to where's that balance is based on where are you comfortable, right? And there's a good chance, quite honestly, you'll hire somebody who claims to know what they're doing better than they actually do. Or maybe you'll get somebody who's honest with you. My first e-commerce client came to me and was really pushing me. And I kept saying, I don't do e-commerce. It's very complex. You should not hire me. I told him point blank, I'd be doing you a disservice. But he had seen a bunch of my videos on YouTube, and so he was convinced that I knew accounting well enough that I was the guy to figure out how to do his accounting. And ultimately, we had an agreement, but I was very transparent with him. And that's certainly one thing you want to look for, is you want to look for somebody who's at least willing to be honest and transparent with you. Because I told him, I don't know how to do e-commerce accounting because I don't have any actual experience with it. Yes, conceptually, I can probably figure it out, but you're going to be paying me full price while I figure it out, because otherwise I don't want to do it because I have other things to do. And he agreed. He was like, nope, that's totally fine. I'll pay you your full rate. I know you can learn it, and I know you're the guy. That's kind of what he kept coming back to and saying to me. So that's kind of what you're looking for. Is, I would say, the honesty is more important than the actual experience. If somebody's got a good solid foundation in their knowledge of accounting principles, you can figure out the e-commerce accounting. It's just a lot more complex than, like I said earlier, a simple service-based business. So those
Yeah.
are,
Yeah, I think the
yeah,
distinction is that, yeah, there's just a lot more possibly moving parts in the
right.
e-commerce
And I
space.
forgot to even mention, which really takes us to the other question, that you have multiple distribution channels in most
Yes.
e-commerce businesses today, right? That's what a sales channel is. So it's all the different places I sell my product on: Amazon, Shopify, which is probably going to be your main website, right? Or, any, you can sell it on Walmart. So all the sales channels are all the different places where you sell your product. Some of you may even have a brick and mortar place with a POS system where you're also selling it to people in person, which is not e-commerce. But if you're also selling online, then the two have to get integrated. In other words, going back to inventory, I want to make sure I'm not going to run out of stock. The worst thing I can do is have somebody get an order fulfilled online only to have to back order it because I ran out of stock because I sold more than I realized out of my physical store. So your POS system for your brick and mortar location has to be integrated into whatever inventory management system you have, which has, so all your sales channels have to be connected to a central inventory management system. So you have accurate numbers at all times on how much inventory you have in any given product.
Yeah. Yeah. And that doesn't even touch on the fact that, like, with all of these different sales channels, and again, to answer your question, Mary, the sales channel is, yeah, exactly that. If you sell on Amazon and Walmart, and something Seth has talked about on previous webinars is that even a brick and mortar technically would count as another sales channel. It's just another place that you're selling. But all these things to say that that doesn't even touch on the payment gateways and the other
Mhm.
mechanisms that work behind the scenes for all of these different sales channels. They all have their own way of function, right? So if you work on Amazon, there's this whole process for their reconciliation or their settlement reports, and that's different from Shopify's payout reports, which is different from eBay's payout reports. So there's all these different functions that kind of have to coexist within your business, and having a secure way for them all to communicate with each other that doesn't make things overcomplicated is, I think, probably the biggest difference from just running a number of brick and mortar stores. Because generally, if you have just a couple brick and mortar stores, you manage the warehouse, and then each specific location has its own inventory and maybe its own systems to a degree, but not nearly to the level that if you have three Amazon stores that all sell different things and a couple Shopify's, and you have an eBay that sells only your, like, returned or damaged goods. There's just so much more capability and complexity, just like Seth said, that it can be a whole new world, I guess.
Yep. And we've got more questions now. So keep the questions coming because I think this is more valuable than, the most valuable thing we can do is
Yeah.
answer your question. So the question, how about if you're a new accountant, we'll tell you how much his fees will be and that he's working pro bono until after he's done the return because it depends on what's involved. So I would be very leery of that. It sounds almost like the accountant's asking you to write him a blank check, unless pro bono truly means you're not going to pay a dime for this tax return, this go around, because that's what pro bono means. It means it's free, right? So that, but I would want a lot of I would ask a lot of clarifying questions to make sure it's very clear. So, okay, so I'm not paying for this return. You'll do this return pro bono, and then you'll know what to charge me for future tax returns, not like some pseudo pro bono where it's like, I don't know what to charge you, so I'm not going to tell you, but then I'm going to just come back to you and say, hey, it's $10,000 for this tax return because it was really complicated, right?
Yeah.
So I would just ask a lot of clarifying questions.
I think that
As to,
applies to, like, any hire, somebody that you bring into the organization. If they don't know what their time's worth already, I would definitely start asking a lot more questions, because either that means that they don't have the experience under their belt to really be able to say what their time is worth,
Mhm.
or they haven't mapped out the structure that is needed for, because it does absolutely depend on what's involved. I mean, every business is different, but if they've been doing it for long enough, or if they truly are a professional, then they probably should have a structure in place for understanding how to quote people before they get hired. So
Yeah,
yeah, like Seth said, I would ask a lot of
I
questions.
agree. I was thinking the same thing. I just didn't say it about, the fact that it speaks to inexperience. So I guess ultimately I would be inclined to say, you know what? No, I'm going to find somebody who knows what they're doing and who can give me a quote. But if for some reason maybe there's a relationship here that you want to kind of work with the person, then I would be inclined to set a limit at least and say, look, that's fine. I get it, but I'm not paying more than pick a number that you're comfortable with based on what you think it's worth. And because I also want to stress, it's these days, it should no longer be about the time it takes, quote unquote. It's more about the value of what you're getting, right? In this case, a tax return. What's the value of that? Well, you're in compliance with and you've got your filing done, so you're not going to be exposed to penalties and interest. But also, how accurate is it going to be? Am I going to overpay on my taxes? Or in some ways, maybe worse, am I going to underpay only to have to pay that much more later on because you get it.
Yeah.
So I would, again, I would be really, I would just ask a lot of questions and make sure that it's very clear if that it's not a blank check you're writing, that there's got to be some kind of a limit, as in, look, maximum, this shouldn't cost more than 2K for the return,
Yeah,
right?
and I think this is a really good segue into the last slide I had before the actual Q&A too. So we'll go through this real quick.
Sure.
Finding the right person, and this applies not only to accountants but bookkeepers as well, just anybody in your organization. But finding referrals is always important. I think finding somebody that's trusted with somebody that you also trust is a good place to start. If you know other business owners or people that have worked with accountants in the past, asking for their referrals is always a really good place to start. Kind of to the last point that we made about asking a lot of questions, do your research. So understand the type of accountant that you're working with or that you want to be working with. Maybe find somebody that specializes in your type of business if you're in retail, or if you like do like leased out industrial equipment. There's a lot of different nuances that an accountant might want to fall into. Um, Find somebody that fits your communication style. If you want somebody that's going to be on the dot, super prompt with their replies and the requests that you have, it's important to be upfront about that, because there could be somebody that has a totally different management style that doesn't necessarily mesh with yours. Um, Find out if you're working with a firm, figure out how large that firm is. That can really affect those response times. If you're working with a really large CPA firm and you know that they have thousands of clients at the top end, you might not be on their priority list, especially if you're not a large client of theirs. Plan a budget, and then this is something that I can speak to Debbie's question on finding an inventory management platform, but pay attention to the technology stack that they use. This is maybe not necessarily as important if you don't know what to look for, because everybody's tech stack might look different. People use different software. Obviously, looking at the big things like, do they use QuickBooks? Do they use NetSuite? Do they use Xero? If you're familiar with one specific software, you might gravitate towards that. But to speak to Debbie's question, you want more information on centralized inventory management platforms. If you're looking for something that only manages inventory, there are an infinite amount of different inventory management softwares out there. I will plug Webgility since we are Webgility, but we do offer a level of inventory management. We call it inventory sync. To kind of explain what that looks like, we pull your inventory from your master system of record. Generally, we recommend that be QuickBooks, and we can push it to your stores directly so that that inventory is synced automatically. And then whenever an order comes in from, say, your Shopify, your eBay, your Amazon, it automatically deducts that amount of inventory that was in the order from your system of record. So it kind of keeps that cycle. But Debbie, I'll take down your information, and I can send you kind of a list of what options you have in terms of inventory management, because there's a lot to unpack there as well.
Yeah, and again, I'll mention on that one, it also depends on the level of complexity you need. There are inventory management systems that will, for example, at one point I was really digging in because I was working with a client and we weren't in love with the system we had. And so we were trying to find one for her. Her issue was her products consisted of both assemblies that I mentioned earlier, as well as kits, which are
Mhm.
different. There's assemblies, like I said earlier, where you have different components that you have to buy and then assemble to create the actual product that you sell. A kit is more like, I have this product and I have these 3 accessories that I sell together with it, and they're optional. So if somebody buys the kit, then they're going to pay for each of these items, and I'm going to bundle it somehow, right? So some systems will handle kits, but won't handle assemblies. Others will handle assemblies, but not kits. So you really have to, like John said, dig deep into exactly what your needs are and understand that well. before you go research what's, in other words, a lot of people I think do this backwards. This is with apps in general, and it definitely applies here with e-commerce apps, which is they go research the app before they've stopped to clearly identify the exact problems that you're trying to solve, right? And so that's where it starts to get really confusing because you don't really know what you need. And you start looking and you say, oh, well, it does all these things. And you're seeing bells and whistles, but a lot of it may not even apply to your business. And you may end up paying for something that comes with a lot of stuff you don't need. So you're overpaying. Right. So
Yeah.
it's really important, I think, to understand what exactly you need. This is where it, I think, will definitely help to have an accounting professional work with you to understand what those needs are. They can tell you, no, you don't need that. But yes, you do need something else. Right.
Yeah.
Ultimately we were able to find something, funny enough, that handled both kits and assemblies, and it does it really well. But we were very happy with the software we were using for the sales to bring the sales in. But this particular product didn't give you the choice. You had to go all in. So you had to use this product to bring in the sales and manage all the inventory and the kits. So it's fine, whatever. We had no choice. We went along with it because we needed the other stuff that they offered. So that's kind of just to give you an idea of what the thought process might be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to kind of answer your question with a little more fidelity too, Kathy, working with assemblies and kits, you'll definitely need something that is a little bit more robust. Just as an example, Webgility, we offer a desktop product and an online product. So one that's in the cloud versus one that's like a application on your system. And our online product doesn't have that kit or assembly capability, while our desktop one does. So at the very least, if you are looking for an inventory management platform, just make sure that you are vocal about needing that assembly and that kit capability, because that does generally complicate things a little bit in terms of how the software functions. And then let me scroll up here because I know we've got a bunch of questions.
Kristen had a question on a specific state sales tax question. And she's using Shopify, and the sales check taxes are getting pushed into QB Online. So there may be some conflicting information here because my understanding and maybe my memory is fuzzy on this somehow. But if you're using Shopify, or for that matter, whatever sales channel you're using, that's where sales taxes have to get calculated. The only reason for using QuickBooks Online sales tax module is if you're not handling the sale elsewhere, because obviously the sales tax needs to be calculated at the point of sale. So you would not want to turn sales tax on for QBO. I believe Shopify can push the sales taxes in fine. It's not going to hit QBO sales tax module. It's going to hit something like a product or service, which tracks that sales tax through a liability account so it can
Yep.
be managed. So you don't want sales taxes turned on for QBO because yes, it's going to try and recalculate sales tax its own way. So now you may be stuck having to fix that because once you turn sales tax on in QBO, it's not that easy to get rid of it.
Yeah, and that's
So
kind of another one of those nuances that exists within the e-commerce space, is that the easy way to look at it is that QBO and QBD works the same way. If you turn the sales tax module on, it's going to calculate it based on whatever data you've given QuickBooks. So if you've told them that you have your sales tax jurisdictions mapped out for X amount of states or whatever, it's going to try and calculate it based off of whatever information you put in whenever you enter in or key in an order.
mhm,
Shopify already charges that sales tax when they do the order based on what you have your sales tax jurisdiction set up as with them. So the way that we always recommend it at Webgility is that you pull in your orders just as you would with the sales tax generated from Shopify, but you keep your sales tax turned off in QuickBooks. And then kind of the way that we manage the paper trail is that you, like Seth mentioned, have it routed to a product or a service inside of QuickBooks. Generally, we recommend just creating like a sales tax product and then having it mapped directly there. And that way you can route it to its own account and have it segmented away from all of your other products or all of your other expenses, so that you can keep that paper trail.
yeah. And I also saw some questions earlier about like reporting and things. So I don't, here's the thing. You're two ways to really get it reports. First of all, really quickly and back on Shopify for a second. And speaking of sales tax, they have a beautiful module in there. You have to find it. It's not like right at the surface, but where it will show you every state that you have sales in And there's two limits, basically. It's based on either transaction volume or a sales dollar volume. And it will show you each state where you are in comparison to those two limits. So it will warn you when you're about to reach nexus in that state, meaning now you've got to go to their Department of Revenue and, get set up to collect and file and pay sales taxes in that state. So speaking of reporting, Shopify has beautiful reports, right? Now, of course, the question becomes, but if I'm selling on Shopify and Amazon and two other sales channels, I really want some kind of consolidated reporting. Well, if you have an app that's bringing your sales into QBO, such as WebGility, shameless plug, then you can use QBO's own reporting, depending on what level of detail you set up. And I saw another comment or question in the chat about really having to understand how to set things up when you connect WebGility. And I think the question was like, are there accountants who can help with that? So one of the reasons, frankly, I fell in love with WebGility myself is their onboarding process. When you first sign on with WebGility, you will get a dedicated person who will get on a Zoom call with you and go through every single sales channel and every single payment gateway that you need set up and make sure that it is set up and mapped perfectly to your QuickBooks Online. Let's just stick with QuickBooks Online as the accounting software, so that things all flow to the right places. Now, what does that mean? It means going into this process, you should know enough to understand the accounting workflow for an e-commerce company, so that, in other words, it's like you have to understand what you need before somebody can help you get that set up. So again, if you're an e-commerce business owner and you don't have any kind of accounting or finance background, I would definitely recommend hiring a bookkeeper or accountant who can help guide you, because I'll give you a quick high level breakdown of what this needs to look like. Right. So in QuickBooks Online, you have a chart of accounts. That's like the backbone of your whole accounting system, right? It's where all the transactions live. It's where your bank accounts live. It's where your inventory account lives, all your balance sheet accounts, all your P&L accounts, all there in the chart of accounts. With e-commerce, another way that this gets a lot more complex than a lot of other types of businesses is that for each sales channel that I have, for each place where I sell, Shopify, again, that's probably your website, Amazon, Walmart, eBay, right? Each one of those needs to have its own sales clearing account, I like to call it. Now, for each of those sales channels, each payment gateway that you needs its own clearing account. So you make a sale, money clears into that sales channel's clearing account. From there, it could get split out three ways based on three different payment gateways into their respective payment gateway clearing accounts. Then at that level, we have to clear it of all the fees and everything that we pay. And then finally, the money sweeps from there to your bank account at whatever net amount you get deposited into your bank account, right? So that's just to give you an idea of the complexity. And you have to go into your setup with WebGility, understanding this, understanding how you have it set up in your books, so that when that consultant comes in and does the onboarding with you and does the mapping, you know exactly how to guide that person on how you want these things set up. And I can tell you that one of the things I've been talking about with my friends here at WebGility, like in the background, so to speak, is coming up with a set of quote unquote recommended settings. So if you happen to come in and you really don't know what to do, we can have a conversation with you and say, here's what we recommend for most companies like yours. But you really should have knowledge going into it. It's like trying to hire a consultant to help you with something, but not knowing how to tell them what you need, right?
Yeah.
So that's important, I think, when it comes to getting that set up. Then after that, again, there is I'm not going to say there's no shortage. There's a shortage, but there are definitely e-commerce accounting bookkeepers who would love to have the opportunity to help you. So if you're past the point of onboarding and you're like, oh crap, I should have done it that way, it's not a problem. There are people who can help you out there.
And
I
even if
know
you
it.
haven't gotten to onboarding yet, like if you're just considering adding software or integrations to your tech stack, it might be a good idea to consult with a bookkeeper or find a consultant accountant out there that can kind of contextualize things for you, help you understand where things are at, and guide you through that onboarding process as well. Because onboarding and really adding any software is you're going to get out what you put into it a lot of times. If you have zero knowledge of how anything works, it's only going to get you so far until you hit a brick wall, and that can be a really frustrating experience, obviously. So, to speak to Chris, I think it was Sherry's question. Is it better to use one e-commerce channel or more than one? I would say it's really dependent on your comfortability level as a business owner. We recommend diversifying as much as possible. I mean, the softwares that we're talking about and the processes that we're talking about really thrive in environments where you have multiple stores or sales channels. But it could be that maybe you found your niche and you use Shopify to a really high level, and that is totally fine to keep it there. But I would always look at the options that you have available. I would agree that a lot of people do tend to find Amazon a little unfriendly, not even just in the management side of things, but just like the practices with some of like how expenses are tracked can be a lot more confusing. So I would look at what options you have and kind of take it from there. But I would say that it's always good to diversify. I mean, like you see things like TikTok Shop pop up into the e-commerce stratosphere lately, and that is blowing up with a certain generation of shoppers. So I think it's always good to look at what avenues you have available, but don't necessarily think that just because it exists, you need to also have a store there. Um, because you should be methodical about it. You should go into it understanding how that marketplace works and kind of be prepared to list your products and grow on there, maybe in a different way than your previous store worked.
Yeah, I don't even think it's a question of whether it's better or not to have multiple sales channels. I think it's more a question of whether it's right for you or not to have multiple sales channels. Because the upside to multiple sales channels is you have more access to reach more of your customers. The downside is more to manage, more accounting costs, right? So those are the things you want to weigh out
Yeah.
as far as deciding what's right for you. A quick story on this. I had a client who was selling on multiple sales channels. In fact, it's that very first client I talked about earlier who forced me into e-commerce accounting against my will. Um, and he had quite a few sales channels actually. And at one point, I guessed that his Amazon was not as profitable because you have so many fees. The profit margins look so thin. And he challenged me on it, which I was actually surprised about. But he challenged me to sort of prove it. And so we had his QuickBooks Online company set up so that each sales channel was a customer. And so we tracked sales by customer that way. So I could get profitability by sales channels. Of course, now we had to tag all the expenses to the appropriate sales channel slash customer. So I did that. But one thing I realized I didn't have on the other sales channels, which is already included and built into Amazon, is the shipping. So quick analysis showed me that most of his shipping that he paid for was for his eBay sales. So I just reclassified all of his, it was one particular vendor he used for that shipping. So it was really easy to reclass that and code it to his eBay store. And as it turned out, much to my shock, Amazon was actually more profitable because the shipping cost of the sales channel where he had to pay for his own shipping was that significant that it actually made his eBay store less profitable than Amazon. So, yeah, again, that goes back to the complexity and how important it is to really have all the data points linked up in the ways and in the places that you really need them to. So, all these things are important to consider when deciding, should I do multiple sales channels? One, if you're small and just starting out, it's probably better to just have one sales channel, maybe Amazon, because that's where you get exposed to the most customers. But Amazon may not be right for you. It depends on your product.
Yeah.
And then keep in mind, Amazon has a bad habit of cannibalizing products. If your product starts doing well, they're going to use Amazon Basics to create their own version of it.
Yeah, that is another thing to consider. And I'll rapid fire some answers off just to some of the quicker questions here that deal with WebGility specifically. Mary, you asked if WebGility can be used with multiple sales channels at once. Absolutely. When you sign up for a WebGility account, whether it's on our desktop product or our online product, it includes two sales channels by default, but you can always add more for a pretty marginal cost. So yes, you can add as many sales channels as you need. Just if you do sign up, just make sure you communicate how many sales channels you need. Um, for sorry, I'm scrolling through TikTok shop. That is a very good question, very top of mind. We've gone confirmation that we are putting it on the roadmap as an integration with WebGility. I don't know what the date looks like for that yet, but it is definitely on our plate. So look forward to us announcing when that will happen, because I am actually really excited about that as well. We've talked to them about adding an integration to TikTok Shop already.
Well, one important
Um,
thing to note, by the way, really quick on the TikTok thing is and this is bigger picture here. It's really important to know what's going on in the economy, in the marketplace, politically, right? Whatever your politics are, it's important that you know that TikTok is facing a ban, which if it goes through, that's going to change everything. Or if Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank ends up buying it somehow, then we'll be back in business. But now I was just reading this morning that they have another platform. The same parent company owns another platform called Lemonade, and they're trying to push their users over to that platform for fear that there's going to be a TikTok ban. So I would be careful investing too heavily in TikTok right now. If you're already there, fine. But I would wait to see what happens. We have less than 60 days to find out how that's going to play out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of those things that if it's a minimal effort for you to branch out onto a new channel like that, because TikTok Shop is, from what I've seen and everything that I know, a pretty low effort to start
Mhm.
venture. You can always try it out and see if it works for you and kind of pull the plug if anything goes wrong there. But yeah, great question. Kayla, you asked if I can explain how order refunds are pulled over into QBO journal entries. They should, I mean, it should just be a straightforward process, just as like pulling in your regular orders. So it sounds like there might be an issue that maybe our support can communicate you with. I'm taking down this question just so I can communicate with our team and we can maybe coordinate with you and get that figured out. If I didn't get to any of your questions, by the way, feel free to reach out. I will go through and try to make sure that we answered every single one. Um, Skylar asked in the chat, where do you predict business owners will overspend in 2024, Seth? Do you have
That's a
any?
great question.
Yeah.
Real estate. They're going to overspend on real estate.
I think that's a
And
safe bet.
I'm only half kidding because if you're talking about businesses that are looking for a physical presence, real estate is the market's up. We're in a pickle, right? Because of what's going on with interest rates. And also we just have a shortage period. Although they are looking at converting like office spaces now that are no longer being used because people went remote. So who knows? But that's the first thing that popped into my head when I saw that question was real estate. They're definitely going to overspend on. But then more specific to e-commerce, it's hard to say. I think infrastructure in general, because what's going to happen is some companies, a lot of companies, maybe it's fair to say, will say, oh, you know what, we need, like you mentioned this earlier, John, like, oh, we need all these sales channels. We're going to sell on all these sales channels. And you're going to spread yourself thin trying to support all these sales channels, only to eventually realize you need to dial it back. So I would err on the side of starting off relatively simple and small with fewer sales channels and then expand logically and make sure that these sales channels are going to get you the right exposure to your ideal client because not all of them will or do, right? If you're talking about TikTok, you're talking about mostly Gen Z, right? If those are
Yeah.
the people that are buying your products, then that's the place to be for sure. So those are the things to think about as far as, where you might overspend. And some frankly will overspend on accounting because you're gonna, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I'm only half kidding. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna hire the wrong person. Look, I see it. There are a lot of accountants out there. I will warn you, who are they're gonna see the opportunity. They're gonna say, "Oh yeah, I can handle e-commerce companies." In the back of their minds, are like, "Oh, I can figure this out." Only to find out that it's a little more complex and the kind of accounting that most people can just figure out. Unless you're like where I was at by the time I took it on, where I already had years and years of experience and I really did thoroughly understand the fundamentals. So it was easy enough for me to put the pieces together and kind of figure out how I needed to get things to flow. So that, joking aside, it might be accounting that business owners are going to overspend on because they're just not going to hire the right person. But what I would say is, chalk that up to an experience, a learning experience, so that the next time you'll start screening people, you'll ask them questions like, how many e-commerce clients do you currently have? Am I your first? Ask them very pointed questions like that, right? And then decide either you're going to take a shot with somebody knowing that they're kind of learning and figuring it out, and theoretically that means they're charging you less. So that might be the way to go when you're just starting out and can't afford. Look, an experienced e-commerce accountant is going to charge you no less than $1,500 a month because of the complexity. So maybe that's the trade-off. You find somebody who's less experienced, you pay a lot less money, but you get, the inexperience that comes with that, and they'll learn with and on you.
Yeah.
So,
And that can be a perfectly valid way to go too, right? Like you
mhm.
giving somebody a chance could definitely work out for you, but there's always that risk that it could be a little more complicated. And sort of another area that I think people could be overspending on, just because I've been spending a lot more time lately looking at this sort of data, is ad spend. I think a lot
Mm.
of people are under the impression that they they look at their cost per click or their cost per lead and they think, okay, well, that is under a certain amount, so I'm totally fine. This is a good metric. We're looking good. But without looking at your overall return on ad spend, so looking at how much money you got from the life cycle of that money you put into your ads, you're not really getting the full picture. So if you are running ads and you're wondering where your money's going, just make sure your return on ad spend is a positive number, is at least 100%. And that way you can feel comfortable knowing that you're not just burning money and that it's making back its money as you spend it. And then there was a last couple things I wanted to address from the chat. Kristen, you asked if there's any other software we would recommend over QB. Um, listen, there's a lot that could be unpacked with this question,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of opinions on QuickBooks, and I think some good, some bad. It's just kind of how it works. But I mean, you could look at something like Zero. Zero is definitely a pretty widely used accounting solution, especially in the UK, that is very comparable to QuickBooks Online. But I think anywhere you look, you're probably going to run into the same sort of issues, in my experience. Um, it's hard to say QuickBooks or die, because QuickBooks is they're the big behemoth in the space. They're the, the biggest for a reason. Um, I would say that it's worth it maybe to stick out QuickBooks. I don't know if you're using QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop. QuickBooks Desktop would make a little more sense if you're having issues, because they obviously are starting to kind of sunset support for it. QuickBooks Online, I'm pretty confident that they're going to continue to improve the experience for users over the. I mean, it does them no good to let it sit and not get better. So I would say look into Zero, look into some of the bigger names that you see in the space, but also consider the fact that the grass might be greener, and you're gonna fall into the same sort of issues with accounting, and the amount of data that's being processed. From what I've seen, you tend to run into the same sort of kind of frustrating things.
One thing, if I can add to that, along the exact lines of what you just finished on, John, is that in most cases, in my experience, when the software that you're using is falling short, it's usually because what you really need is what we mentioned earlier, some kind of an inventory management system that integrates with a product like QBO. These cloud accounting apps like QBO, Zero, there are others, they are not designed to handle these specific niche areas. They're designed to be the core general ledger system, and they are designed specifically for the app ecosystem to work with and plug into. So I think it's likely, without knowing the specifics, that the issues you are running into are likely because what you may actually need is not a different accounting software, but rather the right app that adds onto that software to manage the e-commerce pieces that you need. And like you said earlier, John, it might be the whole tech stack that needs looking at. Like, we need WebGility and the inventory management system, and all the other pieces to make sure it all comes together, and that at the end of the day, I can run that balance sheet and that profit and loss and look at it with my client and say, this is accurate. This is bulletproof. I can prove these numbers to you if I need to.
Yeah, yeah, very good point, and actually super relevant to the conversation. My content person just reminded me that we have a new blog that was just posted last week on the best accounting software for e-commerce. So I'll put this in the chat if you want to read it, and I think this is a good place for us to stop. I really appreciate everybody attending the webinar today. If we did not get to your questions, or if you have more questions, feel free to email myself. It's just john.may@webgility.com. Um, I'm sure, Seth, you are open to people emailing you as well. It sounds like you probably want people to join your Slack channel more than anything, though, right? I know
Yeah,
you
if you email me, you'll get an autoresponder that discourages emailing me, but don't worry about it. I will get it. I will see it. And I do have a free Slack workspace that same autoresponder will encourage you that that's the best place to get a hold of me, because I just despise email. But
and
that's
there's
because
nothing wrong with despising email. I think we're in a day and age where email maybe should be despised.
yep.
Perfect.
Uh,
Well, again, appreciate you guys. We are looking at doing another webinar similar to this exact style within the next month or so, kind of focused around this conversation of omni-channel, like diversifying your portfolio. For those of you who don't know what omni-channel means, it is that conversation of having multiple sales channels or systems that all work together to give you a full picture of the business, give you that fidelity across the entire business. So if you are interested in something like that, just feel free to let me know what you would like to see in the future for webinars. If you guys want to engage with certain content, we obviously want to make stuff and talk about stuff that you guys are interested in. So we will send out the recording here towards the end of the day. Feel free to reply to it with any feedback you guys have. But yeah, everybody enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Seth.